everybody, today Hani is going to continue reading Wonka, inspired by Royal Doll Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Chapter 18, A One-Way Ticket. When Willy arrived at the docks, the chef and the chocolate turtle were there waiting for him. "Your ticket, Mr. Wonka," Slugworth said with an only charm, brandishing a small handwritten ticket. "One way to the North Pole." "It's a premium economy," Ficklegrubber said. "It's basically the same as economy," Portnoy clarified. "But you get a bit more legroom and a fun-sized packet of nuts." The ship's horn sounded, and back in the city square the clock chimed midnight. "Now, I'd love to stay and chat, but tick-tock," Miss Slugworth said impatiently, tapping his watch. Willy noticed that he had stopped at the wrong time again. "Goodbye, Mr. Wonka," Slugworth said, and he grabbed Willy's hand in a final bone-crushing handshake. Willy winced in pain as the man's ring cut into his flesh. "Goodbye, Mr. Slugworth," Willy managed. He bowed his head in defeat and walked in gangplank. On board, he handed his ticket to the waiting captain, who gave the chef a sly nod, though Willy was too consumed with sadness to notice. Within seconds of it boarding, the ship roared to life and was chugging out of the harbor towards the ocean. Willy didn't dare glance back. He couldn't. Instead, he made his way into the front of the ship, where he found a wooden bench with a sign, "Premium Economy," lazily scrawled on it. He settled into the seat and wrapped his plum coat around him. The sky was thick gray and the snow was falling thick and fast now. Then came a sound, a faint clunk clunk and scraping of wheels. Willy turned and was delighted to see the Oompa Loompa lugging a tiny travel trunk behind him. He stopped at Willy's feet and opened it, revealing a minuscule padding seat and a minibar. He plucked an olive from the jar and held it up for Willy. "Olive?" "I'm so glad you're here," Willy said, his voice cracking a little at the sight of familiar face. "Really, I am." "Oh, I'm not going to let you out of my sight, Willy Wonka," the Oompa Loompa said. "Not until you've paid your debt. And I bring glad tidings on the score. I've been doing my sums. One more jar will be even. Or, if you prefer, I'll accept half of a jar of those rather amusing hover trucks." "Well, you're out of luck," Willy said, staring at the vast ocean ahead. "I don't make chocolate anymore." "You don't mean you're going through with the ridiculous deal?" the Oompa Loompa said. "I have to for Noodle," Willy said. "I promised her a better life. I pinky promised." "You should stand up those bullies," said Oompa Loompa said. "Give them the old one too." "That's what an Oompa Loompa would do. But if you're determined to sit there feeling sorry for yourself, I'm going to flit. Good night, sir." Then he pressed a button on his chair, started to whirring, and began to recline. He released his finger from the button when he was completely flat, and then pulled up an eye mask. Willy shuffled uncomfortably in his hard seat. His hand still ached from Slugworth's handshake. It was really throbbing. He held it up to take a better look. "Ha," he said. The Oompa Loompa pressed a button on his chair again, and it whirled back into sitting position. He lifted his eye mask. "What is it?" he asked. "No, it's nothing," Willy said. "It's not nothing, is it?" Oompa Loompa hissed. "You said, ha." Willy shook his head, his eyes still fixed on his hand. "Sorry, forget it." The Oompa Loompa lowered his eye mask again. Willy said again. The Oompa Loompa threw off his eye mask this time. "You did it again! And if you don't explain, I shall poke you vigorously with a cocktail stick." "Look where Slugworth shook my hand," Willy said, holding it out for Oompa Loompa to see. A red pattern was stamped on his skin. His ring made a mark, see, an A surrounded by S, very ornate. The Oompa Loompa plucked a monocle from his pocket and held it up to take a good look. "So, his name is Arthur Slugworth," he concluded. "It's probably a family ring." "But Noodle was one that looks just like it," Willy said. "Noodle?" said Oompa nodded. But why would the little orphan girl have a Slugworth family ring? Only one reason I can think of. Well, what is it? Oompa Loompa asked. And if I'm right, Willy said, slowly rising to his feet and staring off into the distance, then she could be in great danger. He began looking around frantically. I've got to get back to land. Captain! Willy shot in search of the captain. We have to turn the ship around, he cried. Captain, where are you? The ship! We need to turn it around. Come back here, the Oompa Loompa shouted as he hurried after it. I demand an explanation. What is in theory about the ring? But Willy wasn't listening. He tore across the ship's bridge and came screeching to a halt at the wheelhouse. Then he saw what was inside. A tingle of utter horror danced up on his spine. There was no captain, but even worse than that, sitting in the captain's place was a fidgeting, furious bomb. On second thought, his explanation can wait, the Oompa Loompa said, and he played a tiny life jacket. I do hope you can swim, Willy Wonka. The chief of police still reached the three chocolatiers as they watched the ship skim into the horizon. Slugworth's lips mimed the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2. Boom! With that, every inch of the ship went hurtling up in all directions until only one thing left was a plume of smoke snaking up into the sky. Well, gentlemen, the chef said, one that chocolate here as request. Slugworth raised his walkie-talkie. Miss Bonbon, give us chef his chocolate. Miss Bonbon was not far behind them, manning a crane. She grabbed the controls and began lowering an enormous crate of chocolate down in front of the chef. The chains clanged and the crane groaned as it swung dramatically into the wind above them. Miss Bonbon was sticking out her tongue in concentration as she poked at buttons. Then, all of a sudden, she swung the whole thing too far on the left. The chains pinged and snapped, and the chocolate landed on Chef's car with an almighty crunch. There was a groan of metal as the roof sagged, and all four of the wheels popped off. And look, Miss Bonbon's loaded into your car as for you as well, Slugworth said, as they all watched the wheels roll away. The chef didn't seem to care because all he could see now was chocolate. Chapter 19, Settling the Bill. My, what a lot of long faces we have this morning, Mrs. Scorbitt said cheerily as she greeted the workers. They filled past her to the washhouse, and she put a leg out to stop them. I've got some good news for you, she teased. Not now, you deserve it. Not then, you deserve it. She placed a bundle of cash in the register and stamped Abacus's bill. Your friend Mr. Wonka's done a deal with Mr. Slugworth. Gave up his precious little dream to settle your account, she said. So, Mr. Crunch, I believe you're free to go. Abacus stood glowing at the inky paid mark at the paper, completely frozen in shock. Mr. Crunch, Mrs. Scorbitt said, you're free to go. Go on, Bleacher roared. Scam! Before I charge you for dawdling, Mrs. Scorbitt said with a waggle of her finger. Abacus took the receipt, flashed his fellow workers his delighted smile, and then shot off. An excited murmur rippled through the group. That Noodle fixed the horrible woman with a stony stare. After a lifetime of being thrown in the coop, the generosity was suspicious. Bell Bands, Chuckleworth? Mr. Scorbitt droned as she ushered them out of. Only one noodle was left. She stood there, small and alone, the reality of just how alone she was beginning to sink in. Ah, Noodle, Mrs. Scorbitt said, the biggest pile of the lot, and much to Noodle's surprise, she plunked a heavy wad of cash down on the counter with a bang. Noodle's eyes grew wide, wider than they could have ever grown before. She hadn't believed it was possible until that second, but it was her debt, and it was repaid. It was sitting right there, freedom and happiness and escape from the coop. Finally, she would be free. She could go and find Willy and the others. Noodle reached out to touch it. Except this pile isn't to pay your bill, dearie, Mrs. Scorbitt said, snatching it away. Wait, Noodle stammered. What? keep you here," Mrs. Garvin screeched with glee, and she began to laugh heroistically. She couldn't stop. She pounded the counter over and over again. Then she started dancing from foot to foot. "You thought you were leaving. Ha!" Noodle stood frozen in shock as Bleacher bolted the door. "My friend Mr. Slugworth doesn't think nasty little urchins like you should be out of the street. Not in a fine city like this," Mrs. Garvin cackled. "He gave me this money to keep you down in the washhouse for good." She stopped laughing, and her face suddenly grew very serious. "And I am only too happy to oblige." "I hate you!" Noodle screamed, charging for the window, but Bleacher grabbed her by the scruff of her neck and lifted her into the air. "Look at her go, my lord," Mrs. Grubbit said with a cruel smile. "My lord?" Noodle said, and he began to laugh. "You don't steal his royalty, do you?" Mrs. Grubbit looked confused. We made it all up, Mrs. Grubbit." Noodle shouted. "You're a warm water guzzling fool. He's not burying royally. He's not royally at all." At that, Mrs. Garbage face twisted in horror. First she went as gray as warm water, and she looked as if she might faint. Then finally she turned a furious shade of purple, and the vines popping in her head and her nose still flaring. "Right, that's it!" she spat with more fury than Noodle had ever seen before. "You're going in the coop, my girl." She grabbed Noodle by the ear and dragged her out past Witcher, who had momentarily forgotten he actually wasn't the German acrobat and was completely floored by such revelation. "And take the dungarees off," Mrs. Grubbit snapped at him, tears in her eyes. You peasant." "Puffy Waff," Bleacher tried, but it was no goof. Mrs. Grubbit dragged Noodle up the stairs and threw her into the coop, slamming the door so hard that the pigeons panicked. Feathers went flying, claws snapping in Noodle's hair, and she screamed as the last of the birds fought their out of the pigeonholes. She was alone once more. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she stared blankly ahead, wishing more than anything she hadn't dared to dream things might get better. There she is," came a journey cheerful voice. "Hello, Noodle." She turned, and there was Willy, and her face smooth with one of the pigeonholes. He peeked out and saw he was balancing on a rickety ladder. Noodle shook his head, convinced it was dreaming. I thought you'd left," she said quietly. "I thought you'd left me forever." "I did," Willy explained. "I made a deal with the Cardinal. Slugworth promised you if you better life, I left forever. But he didn't exactly keep his side to the bargain." "No," Noodle said, her knees nestled in thick muck. "He didn't. In fact, the opposite. He wants me locked up forever, apparently." "Of course he does," Willy mused as he produced a metal fire and a beating cutting the padlock. "Why?" Noodle asked. "What's he got against me? I've never even met him." "I don't know, Noodle, not for sure, but I think it might have something to do with your parents." "My parents?" Noodle whispered. "It's just a theory," Willy said. "All I know for certain is you won't be safe until he's behind bars." Abacus's face appeared in another of the pigeonholes, making Noodle jump. "Yes, how exactly is that supposed to happen, Mr. Wonka?" he asked. "You said the Curly keeps a record of all their dirty deeds," Willy said, still going at the padlock. Abacus nodded. "In the green ledger, yes. So if we can get a hold of that, we could prove that they poisoned the chocolate. Scorbit and Bleacher would go to jail and we'd be all free," said Willy. "That sounds good to me," Piper said, her face appearing in the pigeonhole next to Willy. "You're all here?" asked Noodle with a huge grin. "Oh, yeah, of course, Noodle. We wouldn't leave you," Abacus said. "Now, Mr. Wonka, may I remind you that they keep the ledger in the vault?" Lottie's face appeared in the pigeonhole next to Abacus. "Guarded by a correct Zurich," she said, flashing Noodle a smile. "And 500 chocolate monks," Larry said, appearing next to Lottie. "That's very true," Willy amused, "but I just had a long, cold swim. Cold water is very good for the brain." stimulates the natural pathways. And after just for 4 miles, I figured out how an ingenious orphan, a plumber, a telephone exchange operator, an accountant, and a man who can talk underwater could combine their skills and pull off a miracle. Mr. Wonka, Erica said it would be exceedingly complicated. Have you forgotten there's a code to get into the vault? Yes, a 9-digit code changes daily. Willy mumbled, his attention fixed on the padlock. He began hitting it. I think I know where to find that code, he said. Really? Piper said. Spit it out then. Well, Will said, taking a break from whacking the padlock and glancing around to check no one would hear. He lowered his voice to whisper. When Prodnoy's wig fell off in Gary's gourmet, I noticed 3 numbers written on the inside. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But then last night, when Fickle Grubber tried to bribe me, I saw he had 3 numbers written on the sole of his nose. I'd bet anything that where they keep their part of the code. You might be onto something, Piper said. That still leaves Slugworth, Lulu pointed out. You're not telling me stuff so to write down anything that important, Abacus said. He isn't, Willy said. I noticed his watch was broken that day I met him. I thought it was strange for a rich man to wear a broken watch, but it was still broken last night, and it told a different time. Why could you change the time on broken watch? Lily said slowly. Noodle's eyes grew wide. Because that's where he keeps the part of the code. Exactly, Noodle Will said as the padlock finally snapped and the coop sprung open. There's just one problem, Abacus said. Even if you do, you get your hands on the ledger. Curl will swiftly buy their way out of trouble. That's the way of the world, Noodle said with a sigh. You're right, Noodle Will said. I hate to admit it, but you are. That's why there's only one thing to do. What's that? Willy's eyes flashed his mischief. Change the world.